First thing I would have to say is that I am so delighted to see the mayor of Mobility has just joined us, one of the great bike advocates in all of Los Angeles, and our progressive hero, our dear Mayor Megan Sally Wells. So I know she's racing from event to event tonight, probably. But Megan, can I put you on the spot and get you to come up and welcome everyone and to welcome John Rossant?
Hi, thank you.
Hey, so happy to see you. I'm kind of I'm elated to listen to you speak and to welcome all of you here tonight. I'm also elated because I just got an electric bike. And it is the bomb. So if you can help me convince my husband to get rid of our car,
yes,
you'll be doing me a good one. So, because we know that this is the direction that we need to go. The status quo of one person, one car is literally killing us. And our general plan update is the opportunity for us to look beyond the present and really ensure that we have a future for all of us. Thank you.
And I see we've also been joined by a couple of important urbanists there in the back, architect Gerhard Meyer and Patricia Bivoot, our urban planner from Amsterdam. But I'm Thomas Small, one of your city council members, and someone who's been trying to push these ideas of new mobility since I've been on city council, and was very involved in our transit-oriented district visioning process, and have been involved in the general plan and particularly in mobility in regard to the general plan. And I am so thrilled to welcome my dear friend John Rossant to join us. And it's pretty fun to get to introduce him because he's a pretty unusual guy. If you Google him and you look on Wikipedia and you sort of click on the links, you can see that he comes from this fascinating family. That he is a born and bred American New Yorker, but with deep and interesting European roots. And then he ended up going back to Europe himself, for his professional life, and spent a lot of time as a journalist and sort of a journalist scholar, I think, of in Italy, in France, and in the Middle East, with a lot of expertise and time in the Middle East. So then his official positions now. So I find that background very fascinating because it's really very much involved in sort of the immigrant history, really, of what I think of as kind of the most important movements of the late 20th century, early 21st century. So all of that sort of immigrant mentality is something that I think is really ingrained in the history, in his biography and in the history of his family, that informs all of this and the relationships between those things. But the other thing that I'm going to ask him about tonight, that we'll do a little later, is that he was very involved with the World Economic Forum and their famous conference that they have in Davos for many years, and he actually just got back from there. So alongside our mobility stuff, I'm eager to get kind of a report from how that has developed and changed and what he might think about it. But he is the founder and chairman of the NewCities Foundation, a major global nonprofit network devoted to improving the quality of life and work in 21st century cities. He's also the CEO of CoMotion, an events and media platform that hosts the CoMotion LA Festival, which is all about mobility. CoMotion is a new animal. It is a fascinating kind of conference that really wants to attract like a broad public, and yet also kind of the cream of the cream of the professionals in mobility and transportation, both locally, regionally, nationally, and even internationally. So it's kind of, I remember when I first saw the announcement, the advertising for the first CoMotion Festival, I couldn't figure it out, because I've gone to sort of the professional ones for a number of years, but CoMotion is a different animal, and it's also a festival of mobility, in that it along with panels and presentations and sort of your standard conference things, they also have all of the toys and you can ride autonomous vehicles, you can try out every new kind of scooter there is, but it's a fascinating animal, and and now he's taking it also to Miami as well as Los Angeles.
And so it changes the entire supply chain and the whole manufacturing process to actually print the parts of the cars, rather than building in the traditional way. So it could change that whole process.
Well, the thing about the mobility revolution that I think is so interesting is that it is truly disruptive. And so you have, if you think about the biggest employer in the private sector in the United States or in Germany, it's the car manufacturing. And that is set to be absolutely disruptive, both on the kind of power drive side as it moves to electric, and then on the industrial side, the way they're put together. And so you have this 50-year-long or more dominion of these big global multi-billion-dollar car companies that are being challenged by upstarts now as never before, whether it's Tesla here in California or Rivian, which is another electric vehicle manufacturer, just came out of a grad student at MIT, put it together 9 years ago, and now they're challenging some of the big players, or Chinese manufacturers, etc. So it's in for a lot of disruption and smaller players. That's what makes it so interesting also.
And it seems like you also found that on the public side as well, in the time that you spent with, my hero Solita Reynolds and Christopher Hawthorne and Joshua Schenck at Metro.
Absolutely, and that's another thing that's just so interesting, because I come at this, after all, from cities. I look at cities, and that's what I've done for a lot of my life. And when you look at cities, you have to look at the mobility revolution, mobility disruption. What's become so interesting lately, in the last even 2 or 3 years, is how quickly cities and municipal officials, you mentioned some of them, like Solita Reynolds, head of LADOT, are becoming really sophisticated, active players. Because cities traditionally have been quite passive when it comes to mobility, when it comes to many things. I think city officials haven't always understood the digital revolution, etc. And now they are in really extraordinary ways. You're getting city officials who are very, very sophisticated and as good as anybody in the private sector and in Silicon Valley, which is great because 2 or 3 or 4 years ago you had an Uber just barreling into a city and essentially writing the rules, or Bird just coming in and putting 10,000 scooters in a neighborhood. That's no longer going to be the case, and I think cities are understanding that they have to be active players in their future. And by the way, I really commend you and your colleagues in Culver City, because I think you're a really good example of what can be done in this geography of Greater LA.
Well, that's definitely one of the things I want to talk about, and that I want to get into when we open up the conversation to the rest of the audience, is issues here in Culver City, and it's a good moment to go into a bit more of the background in regard to Culver City and mobility here in Culver City. When we first started talking about our general plan update of actually doing it, and I know Megan had been pushing it for a few years before we actually got started, and finally we were actually able to get it on our agenda, and now we're full in it. But mobility was a huge part of our selecting the consultant, And we talked. I talked quite a bit with the sort of insider baseball famous former planning director of Vancouver, Brent Todarian, whose whole thing is design against the car, is how you make a city work. And then we had our team had Jeff Tumlin as our mobility guy with Nelson Nygaard, and we very sadly lost him because he's now director of the transportation department in San Francisco.
Right.
But one of the things we're going to want to be talking about is how, we've talked a lot about it here in Culver City. We have our plans, but what, from your point of view, both in Los Angeles and also bringing ideas from all the cities that you've looked at and from abroad, what are the things that we can do here in Culver City to, I have this image of, you have your image at the sort of the beginning of the book and the end of the book of this young woman who is, takes advantage of the modern technology, and there was I think you had invented her in an article in 1999 for Business Week, and what she was doing with her phone, and how it never happened. It didn't happen for another 5 years. So it was kind of a poignant image. And then at the end of the book, you come around and have the same image of this woman living through the mobility revolution and how it affects her in her daily life. But so one of the things I want to approach throughout this discussion tonight is here in Culver City, if we are to have kind of a mobility utopia with mobility as a service, which we're working hard on, which Rolando has really made a huge progress in. What is it going to look like for us 5 years from now? Your other term that I liked so much was the Jevons effect. Am I pronouncing that correctly? The Jevons effect, where you become successful, so too many people come, and then all of a sudden you're all clogged up, and then the people don't come anymore, and what you started out, what started out being your success becomes your doom. We're definitely thoroughly aware of that. We've managed to attract all these big companies. We're having to build more housing. Milt, who is out there somewhere, his wife stops me on the street today to talk to me about all the big buildings that are being built. Mobility, it seems to me, is really a big part of the key to the literal quality of our daily lives.
Oh, for sure.
Here in LA in the future. So I want to get at what in Culver City can we do to really maximize our chances of having, and we'll get back into specifics about that. Sort of your recommendations that you might have for Culver City.
Well, I would say I think you're already doing a lot of good things. If you look at the big LA Metro hubs here, they are truly becoming hubs. Vibrant hubs, which are multidimensional. Shops, you can walk around, etc. And I don't see that happening too much in other parts of this big city. So I think Culver City is doing a lot of things right already. Look, I think it's hard for me to predict the future, but I think I can safely say that the mobility future of Culver City, like other cities around the world, in this country and around the world, will be one, multimodal. There'll be many different types of mobility, running from walking, and I think people will walk more in the future because it'll be more pleasant. And if you have these kinds of hubs here and good sidewalks and interesting shops, people will walk more. And they have to. It's good for you also. Mm-hmm. Biking. The mayor arrived on your electric bike. And for those of you who have never ridden an electric bike, it is a lot of fun. Electric scooters. We're only at the beginning of the micro-mobility revolution. And if you think about this particular revolution is only a couple of years old, already the form factor of electric scooters is changing at almost the speed of light. And, I think at CoMotion this year, last November, we had these amazing contraptions. We had autonomous electric scooters. where you don't even have to sit on them, and you summon them and they come to you. Or at night, for example, when they need to be recharged, you press a button and they all go back to a base autonomously. That's here already. Or scooters that have really fat wheels, and they're just fun to ride, etc. And that's going to change and change and change. To different kinds of, various kinds of autonomous vehicles, and whether they're cars or vans, to a lot of public transport, so multimodal. And then the other thing that I'm absolutely sure of, and that is the future of urban mobility will depend on a very healthy collaboration between public and private. And so I think cities that figure that out and companies that figure that out will really be in the driver's seat, so to speak. Pardon the metaphor, but how
have you seen that work, say maybe in Helsinki or somewhere that we could think about? I mentioned to you that I moderated a panel the other day between Lily Schaub from Lyft and Joshua Schenk from Metro, and we talked. And I hadn't even seen the depth of our own mobility as a service app that I'm going to get Rolando to talk about in a little while.
I just had a little demo this evening. Absolutely impressive. Really good. Yeah.
But Joshua, one of the things he talked about was how, sometimes the private sector is better at iterating than the public sector.
I would say the private sector is always better at iterating than the public sector.
So how can we manage that intersection? How can we work with the private sector? It's like we try, but they talk a big game sometimes, but we haven't really gotten Lyft or Uber to really do anything with us.
We're in the beginning innings, so a lot of it is going to play out.
We have Envoy.
Yeah. Look, I think what's so interesting also is that we're going to be seeing absolutely new kinds of public-private entities and partnerships. If you look, for example, Mayor Garcetti, the mayor of the city next door, at
our suburb.
The Culver City suburb. He launched at CoMotion LA, in fact, in November, something called the Urban Movement Labs, which is, I think it doesn't extend to Culver City. I think it's really LA city specific. But the idea is to connect all of the big city agencies like the airport, DOT, all the big agencies, and ally them with private sector players to look at kind of new kinds of innovation and mobility. So I think they've got Lyft has put in a whole bunch of money, Avis, Verizon, there's a fourth one I forgot. You have very similar efforts in Chicago, in Pittsburgh, where city agencies are partnering with private sector companies to roll out new services. And I think we're only at the beginning of that again.
That's a really interesting model. One of my questions that I have to ask you is, what are some of the key things we can do to break down the silos and get past our own inertia and bureaucracy, and that kind of thing of pushing those partnerships with the private sector is something that we could do more of here.
Well, and I'm sure you will be doing more of it, because you have these very big corporations that are opening up major facilities here, whether it's Amazon or some others. And so I think they're going to have to think, and I'm sure they already are thinking seriously about, how do their employees move around? How do they get to work? How do they go home? How can they cooperate with you in the city? So we're going to see many more of these kinds of things.
Something that you touch on in the book a few times, but that's not a big part of the discussion, but that almost always is here in LA, lately anyway, coming largely because of Salida Reynolds at LADOT, is there was a report on this concept of mobility as a service. Mobility as a service is kind of the idea that we have an app, like we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, that really connects you to all the different modes of transportation that you can use, so that throughout a city, so that you can get from one place to another. Taking the train, the bus, a scooter, a car, a bike, and it helps you figure out how to do that. And that mobility is offered to you in a number of ways. In a way that eventually will become seamless and transparent. But here in LA, what we talk about a lot is, and the quote from this report is from Nadine Lee, who's the chief of staff at Metro, but she says, the most important thing is to design the system for the most vulnerable customers. So that if your system works for the single mom and her daughter in the middle of the night, and they feel safe and they feel like they're going to get where they're going on time, that then it will work for everybody. Is that what we should be making our number one priority here, or should we be looking at serving a wide array of different users in different ways?
I think I would tend more towards the latter. I mean, I think equity is very, very important. We absolutely have to promote policies that protect the most vulnerable, without a doubt. But we need to also make sure that everyone is served, and that goes from people at the high incomes going down to low incomes. So it's it's a difficult question here in LA. I mean, it's interesting because the equity question in LA is has a much bigger, higher priority than in other cities in the U.S. and also around the world, curiously enough. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but equity and inequity is obviously a big issue in American cities.
It's interesting to realize we are kind of on the leading edge of that discussion. I think here in Culver City. Yeah, I didn't see Kelly Lytle Hernandez here tonight, but she's one of our residents who is really a key figure in that discussion. Just before we open it up, just a touch of the Jetsons for fun. Tell us about Uber Elevate and the other possibilities. And we have thorough experience with the concept of digging tunnels under our cities that didn't get too far here in Culver City and didn't get too far here in LA. But I love the depiction of the possibility of helicopter transit. And should we be? I wish Craig Hodgetts was here too, because he's been involved in this. But should we be thinking about where we might have facilities for those kinds of services? Tell us what that might look like.
That's one of my favorite subjects. I mean, look, if you go back to our first CoMotion LA 3 years ago, and you said to this kind of very sophisticated mobility crowd, if you said the letters UAM, nobody would have thought, what's that? UAM is urban air mobility, and it's become a thing. It's a very big thing around the world. There's billions of dollars going into R&D in this country, in Europe, in Germany in particular, in China, in other countries, into urban air mobility. And this is largely electric, drone-like craft, which will take passengers around a city. One of the reasons why LA is going to be absolutely at the epicenter of the mobility revolution is because it is such a vast polycentric city. Urban air mobility is an obvious choice, and it will be part of the multimodal choice here. So I can absolutely guarantee you that if I come back here, if you perhaps invite me back in 5 years' time, some of us may come to this meeting with some kind of electric aircraft that would probably maybe deposit you on the roof or next door. That is coming to our cities. It's going to be a very, very interesting battle with urban constituencies. One of the interesting things is that the noise part is being conquered. I mean, I've seen some vehicles, testing vehicles that are almost silent. It's crazy. You think of the noise of a helicopter. I mean, a helicopter is a very intrusive, polluting device and dangerous, as unfortunately we saw the last few days, tragically. These new urban air vehicles are incredibly safe, will be incredibly safe, not very noisy, and we're probably in a city like LA, I suspect within 5 or 6 years, we'll see thousands of these every day over in the sky. And so there's also a question: will it be visual pollution, etc.? But I think we'll get used to that, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's a very exciting future, I think, ahead of us.
An interesting point.
Am I doing this right? There we go. An interesting point that you made in your description of this is that the business model doesn't work unless it's for like a lot of people. So it should no longer be something only for the 1%. That for it to work, it's got to be that many of us could take this.
Well, so, if you hear the Uber Elevate people, and I mean, I tend to discount that a little bit, but their pitch is that the marginal cost of traveling in the air will tend towards the marginal cost of just riding in a car. So, which means that that this is 25 years out, perhaps, where these air vehicles will be autonomous, so you don't have to factor in the cost of a pilot. And autonomy in the third dimension is a much easier nut to crack than autonomy on the ground, because you simply don't have kids, running out to the street up there.
Right.
And it's planes already.
Planes have been running on autopilot since forever.
They're largely autonomous already. So I think that's not an issue. They're them bumping into each other and crashing. They're going to be very safe. But it's definitely coming for sure.
Well, let's factor that into our general plan. I don't know that's something we're talking about.
I think it's maybe a little bit premature to do that, but
So another subject I wanted to touch on before we open up is the success of sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of the social engineering of slowing down the roads, using congestion pricing, possibly, narrowing the streets to make it cars less attractive. This is really the Vancouver model in some ways, and the Paris and London model of congestion pricing. How hard should we be pushing for that here in Culver City? And how do you think it might work with the surrounding areas?
Oh, God, if I knew the answer to that question. I just don't know. I mean, I think, congestion pricing in this town is going to be a very sensitive issue. It is a very sensitive issue. And I think Phil Washington at Metro has been very courageous in taking it up, really being the first one in Greater LA to take on that topic. I think we're going to have to face it, and there'll be various kinds of congestion pricing. You might pay more to travel in a fast lane, etc. But we simply, as a society, we have to get people out of cars, and especially just these massive big cars with one driver. It's insane in this day and age. Whether it's an internal combustion engine or an EV. So it's going to be very complicated. And I think, our society, thank God, our American democracy is a wonderful creation. It's very messy and complicated, and a lot of voices have to be heard. I much prefer that, and ultimately I think we'll arrive at the right place on issues like congestion pricing. But in a way, I do prefer that to, let's say, I just came back from Paris a couple days ago. In Paris, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, it's really top down. I mean, from one day to the next, and 2 years, no diesel cars, or this major thoroughfare closed to traffic, and forget the consequences. And so it's a very kind of autocratic approach, which we just don't do in this country.
It fits into the history of Haussmann and the design of Paris.
Can you imagine Eric Garcetti saying, well, as of next week, the 405 will be closed to traffic? I mean, it's not going to happen.
I mean, if we could do it, I think I could probably get Megan to close Culver Boulevard. but that would be a nice image.
I mean, just taking the conversation back to Culver City, I mean, I think, look at, Washington Boulevard here I mean, there's such a lot of interesting conversation about what to do with Washington Boulevard. Important conversations. And it's tough. It's a tough thing. It's a major thoroughfare here. It's, clogged with traffic, but you've got to figure it out. It's a democratic, we live in a democracy, so people's voices have to be heard. It's important and processed, etc.
Let's get into that in just a minute with some of our audience. But just before we go to the audience, I wanted to get that report from Davos. What do you think happened there this year? Was it different from earlier years?
Because as Tom says, I used to, in my previous life, I was in charge of putting together the World Economic Forum in Davos for quite a few years, which is a wonderful time in my life, and it was great and complicated and really complicated. It's like putting a man on the moon to get all the deal with 10,000 Swiss troops, security troops, and heads of state who would come with retinues of bodyguards and stuff like that, but and very egotistical CEOs from all around the world, and so it was fun. I was last Tuesday and Wednesday up in Davos, and coinciding with President, what's his name, Trump, who was there, who completely screwed up the traffic, and I missed one of my flights out of Zurich. But anyway,
and Greta Thunberg was there too.
Yeah, and it was. Everywhere you turned, it was, the CEOs of Coca-Cola and Morgan Stanley and Citibank. We're gonna, we have to save the planet, and all good. But the whiff of greenwashing was just everywhere, and it kind of reeked, I think, because a lot of these people kind of arrived in Davos on their private jets, and just killing the ozone zone and emitting, tons of carbon into the atmosphere, and will go back in their private jets, and then when they're there, we respect the environment. So it was really, this year I found it kind of off-putting, frankly, and I'm kind of glad I'm no longer associated with it.
Very interesting.
That's really off the record, so yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to open it up for some questions, but I'd like to start out if Rolando would help us and tell us a little bit about the app that's coming, a little bit, and maybe recruit some folks to the focus groups that they're doing, and tell us a little bit more about what we're doing right along these subjects here in Culver City. That's really new over the last few months that he's been here.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and speak up. I got a pretty loud voice. Okay. No. I got a loud voice. Oh, okay. My name's Rolando Cruz. I'm the Chief Transportation Officer for Culver City, and I have just completed 6 months. It's a good thing. It's a new journey for me, and I tell you, I'm really excited being here. One thing that we've done just recently is, and I love this conversation. It just feeds my soul to hear this. Because even within our own organization, we've been having these type of conversations and talking about the bigger mobility picture and our actual rethinking what is our vision and our why. And it boils down, we came to 3 reasons, that we have to rethink mobility. Everything we do has to connect community, and it has to enhance quality of life. And that has been the big thing that's been driving us. And so when I got here, one of the things we knew we needed to do was that we needed to improve the backbone of our mobility service. We need to be able to give information to everyone, because today's the information age. We need to be able to let people know when the buses are coming. So we have over 5 million trips a year. So we are in the midst of our soft go live, and we're testing out a new application. We've installed all the equipment on all of our buses. It's testing out real well, and with this application, you are able to get the real-time information for your buses. And it is the fastest system in the entire nation. 5-second polling, that means it's faster than what the refresh rate for Google. So every 5 seconds we're polling the bus is telling us where we're at, we're doing an algorithm calculation to give that location. And you've got 5 different ways of getting that information. One of them is through this Next CC Bus app. It's both available on the web as well as on your phone. You're going to be able to get it that you can call a number and go through an interactive voice response, get information. At the bus stop, you just text the bus stop number. It'll tell you the next 3 buses. And then additionally, we're going to throw it in your face because at 74 bus stops within Culver City, we're concentrating on Culver City, where 86% of our ridership actually picks up the bus. There's going to be a sign that will tell you when the next bus is coming. So you can always know where that bus is coming. So what we're doing, I've realized that it's important to reach out and talk to everyone about this. And so we started internally. We've got a focus group from our employees that are active rideshare users that are helping us test this out. And we are now reaching out to the community. So we've got a couple of focus groups that are going to start next week. And we're looking for volunteers. I got some people from Leadership Culver City to volunteer, and I'm looking for a lot more. And I got a great idea today about talking to students and trying to get a focus group of students. So we're asking people to join us on this journey to help us make this software a lot better. I've got some cards. One of our fellow employees can hand this out. And what it is, it gives you all the information about what our focus group is going to do. So we will get you to download the app. We have a survey that's easy to fill out to tell us how it's going, give us ideas, creativity. And even if you cannot come, I tell you, this software is so intuitive. It is so intuitive. It's very easy to use, where you can get your bus stop information. You can schedule it to say, in 5 minutes, let me know when the bus is 5 minutes away. Text me and let me know so that I can go catch it and be there when it's there and ready on time. So all of this is the first step, as what we talk, mobility as a service. It's the first step. Let's get the backbone known, and then afterwards we're going to connect to where are your next scooter shares, where are that bike share, what about the micro transit that we're going to get ready to start here in Culver City, public micro transit. Isn't that the way it should be? So that's the equity question. So please join us. And I'm going to end off with one statement. And I've learned this in my entire experience, and I see that it is so true here in Culver City. So I believe individually people have good ideas, and I believe our department has good ideas. But unless we share those ideas, unless we listen to people, unless we allow people to tell us what's good, what's bad, what can we add, that idea will only be a good idea. Together, by getting all this input, engaging our community, that good idea becomes a great idea, and it becomes our idea. So I really, really seek your input. I seek your ideas, telling us why does it not do this, so we can answer that why. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolando. That's excellent. So let me turn that towards John a little bit. So you saw what we're doing, and I think we can see how ambitious it is. What are some of the? I guess I have a two-part question. What would be some of the models that we can look at that I saw in your book? Helsinki is certainly one, and then that thing in Jakarta was very interesting too.
Mobility as a service, which is the idea that mobility is kind of like a utility. It's like water or gas or something, and you can, you have it tracked, and you buy some of it. It can come in the form of a taxi or a bus or a bicycle, etc. It's all on one app. The model and the concept was pioneered in Helsinki, which is also kind of a large city. A lot of lakes, and it's sometimes hard getting around, and you have to go by bus and a little bit by metro and maybe a private taxi. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, a very smart Finn by the name of Sampo Haitinen came up with the idea of mobility as a service, and the first apps were developed there. Now it spread to, every city in the world has some kind of mass application now. So no, it's, and I really have to commend the Culver City one, which is very, very attractive. I think the drawback is that it's Culver City, and it's not the whole city, the whole vast city, greater city. So it seems to me it's really great to get from one corner of Culver City to another. Maybe I'm not quite understanding the whole thing, but what happens if you live in Culver City? You need to get downtown, LA, or to Malibu. What do you do then?
So we'll need to have it interface with the rest of the region.
And I think I guess there is already an interface. Yes.
So for this, as far as public transit services, to get all the information for Metro, Big Blue, LA Dot, that's there. But unfortunately, within our region right now, where we're looking at it, we can control the scooters if their information is in our geofence. So we're going to have to work with the rest of LA to try to get access to that data. Because there's all different kinds of contracts. So that's why we drafted our new contract that we're going to bring out to allow us to get that info. And then we've got to negotiate that with LA Metro for the bike share. It does take a lot of collaboration, agreement, and trust. I think that's the big key.
Have you seen it work well in Helsinki between public and private?
Yeah, I mean, I think a better example actually is the mass service that's recently been rolled out in Berlin. And that it wasn't exactly the city itself that rolled out the application, but it was the
a joint venture of some kind.
No, it wasn't a joint venture. It was actually the Berlin's version of LA Metro. It was the Metro, the U-Bahn authority in Berlin. And their model is they went to every mobility operator, public and private, in Greater Berlin, and said to Uber, to the micromobility people, the electric bikes, the taxis, private taxis, and said you can use our service for free. And the idea was, by the way, I would give my credit card information to the app that's controlled by the Berlin Metro, and Uber would then get their share with no fee. I mean, the Metro authority is
seamless and transparent.
Totally seamless, and it's really, I think that will become the model for a lot of cities. There are a lot of kinks to it. They'll be ironed out, I think.
But you can get an Uber through
an Uber through
the municipal app.
Yeah. And they'll add, again, in 5 years' time, you'll order your air taxi through that too.
Terrific. Well, let's go ahead and open up to questions. I know. There's some that I can pull out that could take up a lot of time. Anybody dying to? Well, let me go ahead and start with one of those big ones then. Let me ask Ken Mand over there to tell us a little bit about the Arts District and the recommendations from the TOD visioning process, and sort of let's get John to go into a little bit more depth on what he thinks we might do with Washington Boulevard and with the issue of our cut-through traffic and how we can relate. He living in Santa Monica, he has very direct experience of these issues, of this kind of congestion. But if you could just come up and give us a little bit of the background and lay out some of the issues that we're thinking about. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I know you know that.
So a few years back, in response, I think this is working. In response to all the mass development that's happening here, right along Washington Boulevard and National, kind of the impact of that on the community and the neighborhood on this side of town, and the really on top of all the cut-through traffic. So the city commissioned this study, spent a lot of money, tons of community outreach, and we discussed what possibilities exist for this neck of the woods and the Arts District, and also how it interfaces heading, into Culver City and interacts with the region is where we started. And basically the results of it was not making Washington Boulevard the most attractive cut through from the 10 down to Playa del Rey, and creating an environment where people are encouraged to get on a bike, take a bus, potential dedicated bus lanes, and kind of reconfiguring the public space to make it more attractive. A big challenge we have in the neighborhood is, the middle school and high school is, probably 2 miles away. And how do parents get there? There's no school buses. How do kids get there? There's the public buses currently don't serve this area to the middle school. Ballona Creek, it has a lot of improvements that are needed. So there was a dozen or so community meetings, workshops, and everything that really laid a groundwork. And we have this great report, this TOD visioning report. But where we're kind of stuck is these things cost money and a lot of willpower to put in place. So, it'd be really interesting. And another component as related to that, with the TOD and kind of, so much about mobility and density and housing and affordability, and those components go back and forth on each other, because in a way density ties into the solutions for mobility, but if the infrastructure isn't in place to allow for it, then the density doesn't necessarily help the situation. So I'm personally very curious if you have any examples around the world where they were able to stagger increased density on the heels of mobility improvements and kind of trigger growth in that, rather than just keep building and building and then being like, now we're really in trouble. Perfect question. And then I'll have some specific comparisons to ask you about.
There are lots of different examples. I think if you look at transit-oriented development as a whole, it's very interesting to look at Asian cities, because I think they've gotten it really. If you go to Tokyo, for example, which is the world's largest city in terms of population, the place, it runs like clockwork. And you have it's the largest metro system in the world. There are 5 different metro lines that are all very efficient. They're all private corporations, by the way. I mean, publicly quoted in the stock exchange. They make a profit. The ticket prices are really low. You go to any metro station in Tokyo, it's absolutely spotless. And the way they do this is by favoring commerce at metro stations. So if you're one of those metro companies, you have the right to develop the land around the metro stations. It's a model. It's not one we use in this country. I think, unfortunately, I think one of the ways in which LA Metro's got it wrong, unfortunately, is that they don't allow commerce in metro stations. It's horrible. Like, we have to make... It's a little bit different from the question you posed, but it's something that it's kind of adjacent, but I think it's an important one. The biggest challenge is to get people out of cars. And we have a situation in which, actually the ridership in LA Metro has been falling consistently over the last few years, even though there are new lines, etc. There are demographic reasons for that, but which I can go into. But we have to make the experience of public transit much more compelling, exciting, and I told you I love going on the Expo line, but that's not everyone's experience, especially at night, etc. If I'm thirsty, there's nowhere to buy a bottle of water in a metro station. You can't buy a newspaper. Well, not that people buy newspapers anymore, but a candy bar or an apple, or in Tokyo or in Paris, you can all sorts of things you can buy, and it's vibrant and dynamic. The metro stations here are dead, unfortunately. But hopefully that's going to change.
In terms of Culver City and our sort of mobility and congestion issues that we're having with all of this new development and all of these large companies that have come here, as we know in Italy, in Milan and Paris, or in Milan and Rome and Naples and in Florence, the access for cars downtown is severely restricted, and they do it with license plate cameras, and you can't go into the center, so unless you have a permit to go in there. And then they have the congestion pricing in London. How do you think we could do something like that here? We have our own issues with license plate recognition here, but could that? How did it work there?
Well, I mean, it's very, very sophisticated optical recognition systems, etc. But you can't compare a Florence with Los Angeles. Florence and the cities that you mentioned, very, very dense medieval cores, urban cores. Tiny, windy streets. It's not a grid system. It was built for mules or horses or something. So they really haven't. You cannot. They had to do that. It was a necessity as a mother of invention. So they really came up with these systems. I don't think we want those systems here. I mean, we need thoroughfares in LA. I think the future, again, multimodal. One of the moments of sort of eureka moment about Los Angeles for me was 4 or 5 years ago. I was living in New York, maybe 5-6 years ago, and a friend from LA, some young high-tech guy who I had known for a long time, came to visit me in New York, and we were kind of in a cafe. And I said, I said to him, Michael, I could never live in your city. I mean, I hate cars. I like walking around. He said, well, you should come to LA because we actually just got rid of our car. And I said, what? He said, yeah, Uber is everywhere, and it's cheap. At the time, it was a lot cheaper than it is now. And my wife and I are avid bicyclists, and LA is bicycle heaven. I mean, the weather is beautiful every day of the year almost. It's fairly flat, except if you live in some Hollywood Hills. And, if you kind of think in a not too distant future, you look at the freeway system, probably the world's greatest bicycle paths. You could, I can imagine perhaps in my lifetime, something like the 10 becoming a bicycle path, and it's just people zooming, quiet, it'd be great. And then I thought, I have to visit LA and understand what's happening, and that
we did successfully close down the Marina Freeway for a couple of events, running events. It was very interesting to see that. How about they just closed Market Street in San Francisco to cars?
I saw that a couple of weeks ago, and it's not complete closure. I mean, they're buses and they're I think taxis. I saw a few cars actually, and it seems to be working. I mean, we should do that here. We should do that on just close Wilshire or close Sunset. Period. And it'll happen. It'll happen sooner than you think.
Sure, let's have some questions. Go. Come on up.
Okay. My name is David, and so my heart kind of sinks when I hear the future being little buzzing things that are going to go over our head and take us individually to places. It feels like we're admitting failure, that we can't make what we have work. We're talking about, let's make a private tunnel underground so that we can take our private car 100 miles an hour underground. Let's have a drone that's going to lift us up over all of our problems and drop us somewhere else. And the amount of energy it would take just to do that, that's like the most inefficient thing I can imagine, is like things like flying them somewhere as opposed to going on the ground. And we have incredible infrastructure now. You could go 100 miles an hour on the freeway. We just have too many people, and we're all doing it the most inefficient way possible. So my question is, how do you convince people that what we're doing now is incredibly inefficient, that there are more efficient ways to do it that actually feel good, but we just can't imagine it. So we come up with these ideas like we're going to fly over everything to fix it rather than change what we already have so that it works better.
Let me just make a quick comment. Part of that is why I'm so proud of Rolando's work, because making our bus system really is our backbone for public transportation, and making that bus system work so that we can get around our city very efficiently and quickly and easily. Moving towards that, the app is huge, and having just the bus system work better, over the next years. I know he's going to do it, is going to be huge. But
I don't quite agree with you, because I think this third dimensional mobility, I think people will be excited about it. A lot of people will be excited about it. I think we do have to worry about visual pollution and things like that, but I don't think it's an admission of failure. I think, again, it's about choice and the multi-modality of transit options in the future. I mean, today we're constrained. We have the car, and that's it in this city, and a little bit of public transit. The future is going to be so much richer, and I think that's really important. It's going to be a kind of a mosaic of different mobility options. So I'm looking forward to that future. Yeah.
I'm glad you said the word choice, because at the very beginning of your talk you were talking about walking, which is one of our basic mobility choices. But what I've noticed walking is that it's getting more and more difficult in the sense that there's noise pollution. And that may not seem like such a big problem, but it's extremely difficult to be walking in a city where it's noisy. If you've walked in San Francisco, it's really noisy. There's a lot of building going on and so on. But here, even if there's no building going on, it's quite noisy because of the car traffic. So it's hard for me to see or understand what you're saying when you're talking about widening our choices. It's like, we'll widen the streets. But, that's more noise.
No, I don't want to widen the streets at all.
More noise, more traffic. It's less like Florence, where you're eliminating the choices so that people make better choices. So I'm not really getting the message here about this infinite freedom type message. To me, it's incompatible with a progressive future.
Fair enough. I mean, I think one of the basic things is we have to simply stop subsidizing the cars, which is what we do massively in our country. I mean, our taxes pay for streets for cars. And we have to be more transparent about the dollars and cents and where they go. Today in Los Angeles, every single private car in Los Angeles there are 3 parking spaces per car. We treat cars better than we treat our homeless people. We have 60,000 homeless people, nowhere to live in LA. We treat our cars better than human beings. That can no longer be the case. So I think we have to be much more transparent. I think millennials and Generation Z, etc., X and Z, and the younger generation, they're starting to understand just how much it costs them and society also to have a car. Before you do anything, it's $8,000 a year in insurance and gasoline, etc. I think a lot of younger people are making the calculation. Maybe it's better I have an electric bike, or I use public transportation, etc., or shared mobility. I think it's a kind of societal, secular shift to this, to a new model. I hope so. But I think we have to, again, be more transparent about really what funds are going into subsidizing private cars in this country.
I'm Doug. I'm a resident. So, your question about what do we do in Culver City, particularly, I'm just reading this book by a gentleman by the name of Samuel Schwartz. He was the former director of transportation for New York City, and he was talking about autonomous vehicles and how our lives are going to be changed by them. And autonomous vehicles are closer than one thinks, right? 5 years. And here's my idea. So your standard vehicle now is about 6 foot wide, but the lanes themselves are like 12 feet in width. So when the autonomous vehicle comes in, they don't need to have there's no human element. So you can actually have the vehicle go into a much smaller lane. So what you do is, and this is my idea, it's actually Samuel Schwartz's, but you restripe all the lanes in the city, or in the core area downtown. You restripe them so you allow, you could almost double the number of lanes that way. Right away, you dedicate lane for biking, more sidewalk space, and then you only permit fleets coming through with multi-occupants in each car or bus or taxi coming through the city, so that if you're not in sharing a ride, then you're not coming through. That's my idea.
You have a whole chapter on the complexity of all the sensors needed to...
No, I think obviously we need policies that favor sharing. I mean, that's really, really important, because otherwise we have a pretty nightmarish future in which, so I'm a kind of wealthy guy, I have my own autonomous vehicle, at sort of 3 a.m. I've had a couple of puffs from of weed or something, I have the munchies, and I send the vehicle out, 2 blocks to a Dunkin' Donut to retrieve a donut for me. I mean, that's not impossible that's going to be our future. But I think we have to make sure that we kind of work to make a much more shared future, that the kind of thing that Sam Schwartz is talking about. I think, the technology is largely there. I mean, there are a lot of companies now that are working on what's called platooning, for those of you who may not understand that term. It's exactly that. It's, when you go in a freeway, you can have a series, it's really for trucks now. You can have one truck which has a driver, and then behind it, 3 or 4 trucks with maybe a foot between it, but you have sensors and so you have these platoons of vehicles, and the space that's saved is remarkable. Yeah. So that's the concept, basically.
I have to defer to Madam Mayor, who had a question with him.
Thank you. I kind of want to go back to what David was saying about just being smarter about what we've got. And to me, dedicated bus lanes are the answer. And I was lucky enough to live in Paris at a time when the previous mayor, Delanoë, made one of those really bold decisions. Luckily, Paris is just one government, and it's one transit agency. It's not 88. And was able to say, you know what, we are taking away 2 lanes of traffic, of car traffic on every main arterial, and we're going to make that a dedicated, protected bus, bike, taxi lane. And all of a sudden, taking the bus was the solution. And, you talk about platooning and all of those things. Well, the efficiency is that you've got multiple people in that vehicle. The communications was there in terms of readily accessible maps. Like, I grew up in LA, and you had to be a transit rider to take the bus, right? You had to know the secret code and what, the card and the schedule. It was highly complicated. But in Paris, you're just a person who hops on a bus because it's right in front of you, and that's where it's going. And so I feel like the frustration of in our society that we have made the worst things for the environment the easiest to do, and the best things for the environment the hardest to do. And if we can change that paradigm, like, I think we can actually change that paradigm in the next few months if we collectively decided to build protected bus lanes. And and you're like, but you're the mayor. You should just do that. And we'll try. And as you said, it's a democracy. There's a process. I'm lucky. I'm going to be termed out, so maybe it'll just be like, let's do it. But I think this idea that David talked about of better using existing resources means that we are the Judsons, right, already.
I completely agree. I would love to see that. I would love to see not only protected bus lanes, but also really good bike lanes, which we just don't have here. Because again, it is a city made for bicycles. Not all of us can ride bicycles or want to ride bicycles, just as not all of us want to get on a bus. But it's really important means of communication. I mean, if you look at German cities in particular, Munich, where I was recently, or Japanese cities, I mean, a very, very protect biking lane. I mean, it's painted a different color than the black asphalt in Japanese. In Munich, I think it's sort of reddish or something. And it's really, really well used. It's how people get around. But again, it's a pretty denser core. But I would use my bike a lot more if we had those here today. And I think a lot of people would. Definitely.
Please come on up.
Thanks. I'm Michael. I live right across the street, actually. The political question, though, I think is serious. And we can compare ourselves to Helsinki or cities like that, but, the pushback that we have here, I think, is pretty dramatic. And, when we did the bike lanes on Venice, I think it was, and huge, people don't say anything when it's being put in, but suddenly they're dead set against it. Yeah. And the thing is that we're, like, for instance, years ago I was teaching a school mid-Adams, and I was living in Santa Monica, and there was a guy who lived near me, and I said, hey, why don't we carpool? And he goes, why? And like, well, what do you say? Like, if you don't really get that, you're not really going to get it, which he didn't. And so they built the Expo, which I take all the time, and I love it, the Expo line, and but they didn't put turnstiles in, which you're just going, really? It just seemed so stupid. I come from the East Coast, all criminals. But when they start, and then they're going to build turnstiles. And I had this idea, speaking of ideas then, and this is also ties into what else we're talking about, which is to, rather than spend the millions of dollars to build the turnstiles, it's like, why don't you start a lottery and have every day, this money that you've got, the millions of dollars, somebody's going to win $500 who's riding on the train, on the Expo line, or whatever. And suddenly, I don't personally play the lottery myself because I can count, but a lot of people do. And I think that, you know, I sent this idea, I sent it to the Times, they didn't publish it, I sent it to the LA City Council, because they're the ones, and no one ever took the idea. But I think as a teacher, and as a special ed teacher I was for 30 years, you know, positive things are a lot better than saying to people, you can't drive, or you can't do this, rather than saying, hey, you might win $500 today if you take the train instead of driving a car. That, I think that appeals to a lot of people, but I don't know what you think.
Anybody doing that? Yeah. Come on up, Gerhard. Come on up.
I go to many meetings like that, and rarely do you hear positive, sensible, intelligent input. I mean, I think this was amazing. And I think that you are in a unique position because of that in Culver City. LA needs an example for how to work differently. It really desperately, badly needs an example for a different existence than get in your car and drive everywhere. And you guys could be it. I actually live in Culver City, but on the very, very far end, you know, on Beethoven, down there on the very little tippy toe of Culver City. I think this is the best chance we have in Southern California because we don't have an example. I don't think you should mingle with LA. I think you should build a wall around it and forget about them and do something else here. Because it's hope. I was at the same conference as Tom was, and I was on a panel there too, and I came away with despair, actually, from that conference. I was not encouraged at all. It's like, you know, you're trying to solve the same problem, square peg in round hole, and you're trying to hammer that square peg forever, and it doesn't go in, and then you look for a bigger hammer, and then we're all disappointed that SB50 failed, and it's just not going to work. You've got to do something different. And you guys have a chance here to actually demonstrate that. And all these suggestions are great. I agree with everything except for the flying cars. I don't think that we need to do that. But yes, so I think this is an amazing group, and I think you sit in a really unique position. I mean, in 10 years, if we don't turn around our habits of carbon use, in 10 years it might be too late to do anything else. I think this could be our best chance we've got.
You asked about Davos. What I should say, and I was a little cynical about it, what I detected there, and I sense all around, is a real sense of urgency. And I think that's going to start to drive policy around the world in a very positive way. It's clear there's more and more constituency that will accept changes in policies that are aimed to reduce carbon emissions.
Hello. I want to know your thoughts on the new transportation that is coming to LA, which is the gondolas to Dodger Stadium.
I love it. I think it's a really great idea. I'm not sure it's not going to be a mass thing. It would be great when there's a Dodgers game and stuff like that. So it's not going to serve a massive amount of people. But again, it's part of our multimodal future. And I think it's a more symbolic thing than anything else, just showing people there are other ways of getting around than a car. And it's also a way of, leveraging Union Station in sort of an innovative way. And gondolas are a lot of fun.
I have one comment about incentives. So Santa Monica just passed their new sort of scooter ordinances, and part of it was offering a $150 incentive for parking your scooter in a designated lot, which makes a lot of sense. Like one person a day is going to get $150 for doing the right thing. So I think that makes perfect sense. Another comment. I'm a resident of Mar Vista. I live in the 1 mile stretch that got the road diet. And our city council member got totally pilloried for that. And for a lot of people who ride bikes or want that downtown Mar Vista to be a more vibrant and kind of walkable area, it made a ton of sense, and we were all for it. But the pushback that he got was enormous. There was a recall effort, etc. So your point about this being a democratic system is well taken, but I also feel like we need we need leaders to step up and do the authoritarian thing and say, this is what's right. You know, yeah, I mean, like, so what happened on Market Street, or you know, the redesign of Sunset Boulevard to make it more pedestrian friendly. I feel like these things, you know, we need the political leadership and the courage to just say, we're going to shut this, you know, we're going to shut this street down, or we're going to do protected bus lanes. And I don't know if there's ever going to be the sort of public, you know, the groundswell of public support for these things. I do think we need that authoritarianism.
So you're encouraging us to be spendthrift and spend all that money to do that.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Well, I guess my question is, what's the path forward to getting sort of these redesigns of our public space?
It's it's complicated. That's why this vast LA region is so fascinating, because it's so challenging, it's so jurisdictionally challenged and siloed in every which way. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe the 88 municipalities have to agree on a single transit czar who would. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is.
Well, to address that question from a political standpoint here in Culver City, it's very challenging, because to do this stuff, it does cost money, and we are, you know, in a severe financial crunch with our municipal budget. So it's, you know, I often feel that we just need to make those decisions and take that heat when some of our constituents say, you know, how can you be spending this money when you're telling us we don't have this money, and you want to continue the sales tax, you know, and et cetera. So we just have to say, look, it's going to make all of our lives better to spend this money. And then I also think that your suggestion earlier of that we need to work, you know, more collaboratively with the private sector, particularly here in Culver City, where we have all of this private sector activity going on. I think we need to lean on them and collaborate with these companies to help us make our city work. So that's certainly what I think Megan and I are trying to do.
I mean, I think I agree with you. I think there's another aspect, and that is, you know, there is a big constituency in this country that is very attached to the cars. Yeah. And, you know, if we think of the constitutional battle we have in this country over the Second Amendment, you know, I'm worried that cars will be tomorrow's Second Amendment issue.
Pry my steering wheel from my cold, dead hands. Yeah.
But believe me, I've heard people talk in those terms at public meetings in this country, in this town, in this city. So that worries me a little bit.
Okay, I think, Ashley, can I have one more? Okay, well, last.
What you're saying, it's not about everyone having to get out of the car. It's just the magic percentage of people willing to get out to make the whole system better.
Yeah.
Is that 5%, 10%, 20%?
Yeah, you do talk about that in the book, and toward the end, there's one of the entrepreneurs talks about how you know that if you get a certain percentage off of the cars off the road, then everything flows better. And Mayor Garcetti talked about that. Yeah.
You know, it's not that big about it.
Yeah.
And we'll do it.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee you, when we meet again, even in a year, the landscape will have changed considerably. I mean, it's things are moving very, very, very fast. It's the sense of urgency about the climate. People understand the issues more. I think we have to be more transparent with people and tell them what's at stake. And again, the sector is so fascinating. It's being disrupted very rapidly, and we're really getting it.
And in that way, we're very lucky to be here in this place here and now. So can we get a big thank you for John Rossant?
I want to move here, like Culver City. So.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Sorry? Oh, we have John's book from Book Soup in the corner. I'm sure he'd be happy to sign some books for you. And so we'll be right over here on the left-hand side. And once again, thanks to Envoy for hosting us.